Today, we're exciting and interesting program coming up because I'm going to be interviewing Dr. James Fadiman, actually we call him Jim Fadiman, on his latest book, The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. I've been a clinical psychologist now for close to 50 years, and during that time, suppression has been the word that we use to describe research in psychedelic medicine. It's one of the most odd things of my entire career, how a whole area of research, something that's so important, psychedelic medicine, has been suppressed for that entire 50 years. It's been suppressed by the U.S. government in the strongest fashion imaginable. When I went with a delegation of scientists led by Rick Doblin, Dr. Rick Doblin, the founder of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, when I went with him and this delegation to Israel some years ago in order to discuss with them the possibility of using the psychedelic medicine MDMA with their people who have post-traumatic stress disorder, we were told by their government officials that they would love to use the medicine with their patients, but they couldn't, because if they did so, the United States government would cut off funding. This was the first time that I realized the extent to which our government was not only suppressing research in our country, but was suppressing research around the world. And we're not talking here about suppressing research by people in backroom laboratories or in basements across the country. We're talking about suppressing research at the highest levels of university work. We're talking about suppressing research at Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Stanford, etc. Well, now there has been an emergence. Psychedelic research is sort of tiptoeing into being, if you will, in this country and around the world. And as that tiptoeing is coming forth, we have this new book, The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. And so with that, I want to welcome Dr. Jim Fadiman. Welcome to Mind, Body, Health, and Politics, Jim. Are you there?
It's a wonderful pleasure to be here this morning. Thanks.
You're very welcome. I first met Jim Fadiman some 40 years ago when Nick Cummings, who went on to become president of the American Psychological Association, brought a bunch of us together, brought 200 psychologists together to start the California School for Professional Psychology. It was the first independent, freestanding PhD granting program in the United States, and that's when I first met Jim. I have followed his career for 40 years. I've admired him, I've respected him, and it is a great privilege to have him on the program today. Jim, as a way of sort of starting out our interview, I'm going to take the liberty of doing something that I've really never done before, which is I'm going to read from your book a couple of the comments that have been made by distinguished researchers around the world. Here's one by Stanislav Grof, Dr. Stanislav Grof, a giant in the field of research. One of his books is LSD, Doorway to the Numinous. Stan says, James Fadiman, one of the foremost pioneers of scientific research of the potential of psychedelic substances for therapy, self-discovery, spiritual quests, and creative problem-solving, has written an invaluable guide for safe and productive sessions. Based on more than 40 years of the author's experience in the field and presented in a clear and easily understandable style, this book is a breath of fresh air, dispelling the misinformation that has been disseminated over many decades by sensation-hunting journalists and fear-based anti-drug propaganda. Here's what Charles Hayes, author of Tripping, an anthology of the true life psychedelic adventures, has to say. At last, there's a practical common sense manual for mindful therapeutic sessions using psychedelics, one that's informed by the latest science and unfettered by arcane platitudes. It will be a boon to personal transformation and a roadmap for avoiding trouble along the way for all who use it. Bon voyage. Neil Goldsmith, Dr. Neil Goldsmith, author of Psychedelic Healing, says, The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide is a brave and uniquely valuable book. Written by one of the most highly respected and innovative researchers from the 60s, this extraordinary book covers topics not found in any other book on the subject. And he goes on and on. Jim, I could go on with but I won't. So I want to talk to you now, of course. And my first question is, how do you write a book about exploring a medicine that is illegal to administer or use?
Well, there's two ways you go about it. One way is to recognize that there are some basic research that we had started before the government stopped us, and there's some research that's coming back in, so you can talk research. The other is to notice that since the government banned all possible uses, research, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, 23 million Americans have taken LSD. And not only that, but that number goes up 400 to 600,000 each year. So there's this vast number of people who've had experiences, and it turns out that over the last 40 years, nobody's asked them. So I've started to go around asking people about different kinds of experiences, different kinds of questions, and trying to find out a whole lot more than we ever knew. And there's some new uses that are coming in that I'm reporting on, and the book actually is the first publication of some of those. So it's kind of a little bit old, a little bit new, I guess a little bit borrowed, a little bit blue.
Yes. Where do these numbers come from? You cite two figures there that are of interest. One is that 23 million Americans have experimented with it, and the other is that 400,000 to 600,000 people are going to try it for the first time in the coming year. As a researcher, where do you get those numbers from?
Well, I personally think the numbers are a little low because the numbers come from the U.S. government as the total source, and they ask every year, I think mainly the end of high school people, kind of what have you been using in the last month or so, and what have you ever used? And so we're gradually accumulating this research base. So this is, if you think about it, imagine the government gives you a little form and say, please check off all the illegal activities you have been involved in. I suspect there's underreporting.
And the same for the 400,000 to 600,000. It's government collection of data.
Yeah, just as I compare year to year, you just see the number keep going up. And so that seems to be the case. And remember, that's only the U.S., and that's only LSD. If we include MDMA or ecstasy, the figure jumps, obviously, a few million. And if you simply add other consciousness-altering drugs, one of which is well known in your listener area called marijuana, the total figure in the U.S. for people who don't think the government's prohibition personally is about them is 140 million. So we are a country of lawbreakers, or as some people say, we're a country of plant users.
Mm-hmm. Or I suppose from another perspective, we're a country of hypocrites.
Well, only, let's say the people who make laws often do it based on kind of spur-of-the-moment excitement. And one of the reasons the research is coming back is the government actually is not desperately trying to prevent research. It's just allowing the research to proceed extremely carefully and extremely safely.
You've been investigating and researching LSD and other psychedelic medicine for at least 40 years, ever since we first met. Their word on this that's been put out by the media over the years, this is one of the most important questions on people's minds, is LSD. How dangerous is it? If you look at the sun while you're on LSD, do you go blind? Does hair grow on the palm of your hands? Do you end up in the emergency room? We now have 40 to 50 years of people, as you say, using it illegally, using it on their own. You're citing figures going into the tens of millions. You know how many people are being admitted to emergency rooms, each year around the country. You know how many people are died. Please share that information with us.
Yeah. What I say to people is these are very powerful substances, and used incorrectly, you can get in trouble. Used correctly, the chances of anything going wrong are extraordinarily low. And one of the reasons I like LSD is that you use literally millionths of a gram. There's almost no physiological changes. And therefore, the things that go wrong are if you take it in the wrong setting with the wrong friends, at the wrong time, with the wrong other substances, or take too much, which is probably true of most other substances. The figure I'm currently enjoying is there's a poster put out by a particular group that kind of lists drugs that'll harm you. And obviously it starts with tobacco, 400,000 deaths a year, and alcohol, 125,000 deaths a year. And it kind of goes on down. And the second item from the bottom is peanuts, which is 100 deaths a year. And then you'll guess who the organizing group is. The bottom is marijuana with 0 deaths a year. Psychedelics even aren't on the list. Now, but I admit, beginning to worry about peanuts.
Well, actually, I have a story in my own life about peanuts where my wife and I were going to have dinner with a couple that were interviewing for a position at the University of California, Berkeley. They were coming from Harvard, and we missed the dinner, but they went out to dinner that night, and the man from Harvard told the waitress that please be sure that I don't, there's no peanuts in anything that I eat because I'm allergic. And cut to the chase, there was peanut oil in something they served him, and he died at the table. And that was a very important story in my life about, how allergic a person could be. And I guess he got an anaphylactic shock and went right down. So what you're saying is LSD is not even on the list. So,
well,
basically,
but when you say we're dealing with something which affects the mind and really doesn't affect the body, and if you're in a bad situation, now have people gotten into serious trouble? Have they been hospitalized? Have they been hospitalized for years after taking any of the psychedelics? And the answer is yes. But probably as much from the bad situation and from the kind of well-meaning but ignorant mental care they received immediately afterwards. If you, say, go to Burning Man, where there's a huge amount of drug use, they also have a medical tent and what they call sanctuary, which is to help people who are frightened and upset and paranoid and also dehydrated usually, simply recover without interrupting the flow of the experience so the experience can complete itself. So there are ways to work even with very difficult situations. And that is what you find at major concerts, at major festivals, and more at places like that, because people have not had the chance to get decent information for the last 40 years. And so one of the reasons I wrote the book was to put out really the basic safety information to ensure that if people are going to use something illegally, that they have the best information available so they get the safest and most beneficial experience possible. We mustn't forget that the reason people want to use these substances is because they feel there's some benefit.
Yes. So here we have a legal book about how to use an illegal substance that is so attractive to people that they're using it by the tens of millions right in the face of various government and media focus, which says this is so dangerous that we're making it illegal.
Well, my favorite kind of story on the last time the government tried to prevent people doing what they want was called Prohibition. And the thing I love is, before Prohibition, around Times Square, there were 800, within, say, a mile of Times Square, there were 800 drinking establishments. During Prohibition, there were 2,500 drinking establishments in the same area. So I think we should have and could have learned that Prohibition is not the best way to prevent people using whatever it is that the government doesn't like.
In fact, if anything, it makes it more interesting because it's sort of like when we're children, we're told that we should keep away from a certain thing, yet somebody else might be using it, and we're thinking, gee, if that's a thing to keep away from, I want to find out what it is.
Well, the image
right? We
I
build
always
a mystique.
have is never hand a bean to a small child and say, don't put it up your nose.
Exactly. We're going to take a tiny break here from our interview, Jim. Please allow me, because this is Pledge Week here at KZYX. And one of the things you listeners want to know is that Dr. Jim Fadiman has generously allowed us to offer the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide to you as a premium if you will kindly pick up your phone right now and make a pledge of $100. This book is worth a lot more than $100. We're going to go on and tell you more about it. The subtitle of the book, The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, is Safe, Therapeutic, and Sacred Journeys. So pick up your phone right now, folks, and support KZYX, support this program, Mind, Body, Health, and Politics. You know I'm doing a long series on psychedelic medicine. It might be the longest series that anybody's ever done on psychedelic medicine. We had Dr. Dennis McKenna on. We have Dr. Jim Fadiman. We had Dr. Michael Midhofer on the MDMA study. We've got Dr. Dave Nichols coming up, who's going to talk about his research at the University of Indiana on LSD. Dr. Charles Grove from UCLA Medical School is going to talk about psilocybin in the treatment of cancer. And Roland Griffiths is going to talk from Johns Hopkins about the psilocybin study that's going on there. And it's going to go on because this is a monumentally important area of research, and these medicines have huge potential that we have not even come close to participating in. So pick up your phone, will you? 707-895-2233, 707-895-2233, and make a pledge of $100 and get the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. Back to us, Jim. What do you think it is that's attracting tens of millions of people to take a risk? It must be a risk to them in the face of so much negative press and negative governmental attention, and yet tens of millions of people are willing to take this risk. And without your book, they're taking it in who knows what kind of conditions. Whereas when I say without your book, because your book is so clear on something you're going to talk about, which is the imperative of set and setting, what your mental set is when you take these medicines and what the setting is in which you take them. What's drawing people, Jim? When you're doing these interviews, what's drawing them to be willing to take this risk?
Well, what people are saying is it looks to them as if the reality that we normally see around us, material reality, simply isn't all there is. And we know that's true because we dream, we go into other spaces, there's hypnosis, there's fasting, there's all kinds of ways in which people historically alter consciousness, and they seem to think that's important. It may even be a necessity if you want a full understanding of the world we're in. Just as we use a microscope and we discover things that we think couldn't possibly be that way. And so, historically, in every culture we know of that had access to psychedelic plants or mushrooms, they used them almost always in a spiritual context to open the valve of awareness, to simply take in more of the way things actually are. And what people report is it matters. Early study of mine, 100 people, one single LSD session guided with a staff helping. 78% of them said it was, if not the most important experience of their life, in the top few. And if something is that meaningful to that many, that larger percentage of people, there's probably something there. So, and I might add that the list of people that you're interviewing, it feels to me like you guys should think about a small book of recording all those talks, because you're right, it is the most extensive series that has appeared on public radio.
So people are open and interested in the possibility of what other realities exist in addition to the reality that we walk around in everyday life. Yes?
And if you look at every spiritual system, Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, etc., they all talk about that there is a reality of the spirit. And it turns out that if you can investigate that for yourself and have your own experience of it, that you are basically in a better position to understand the way the world works.
You interview people, they've taken this, and they've taken it in every kind of way imaginable, right? They've taken it and gone to rock concerts, and they've taken it with their eyes closed, listening to Beethoven.
Right, and they've probably taken it climbing up rocks as well.
Indeed. Please tell our listeners what, from your book and from your experience, what, if you're allowed to do this, you'll have to tell me. Maybe I'm asking you a question I shouldn't ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is the proper way to take LSD?
Well, I'm going to give your listeners what I guess you call on Pledge Week a premium. And the premium is there is several chapters of the book up for free on a website which describes it in great detail. And the name of the website is EntheoNet, E-N-T-H-E-O, guide, Entheo guide, E-N-T-H-E-O guide, .net.
Spell it out again, please.
E-N-T-H-E-O G-U-I-D-E .net. And it's a site that I don't have anything to do with, but they asked me to contribute those chapters so that people would have access to the 6 major variables that make a successful psychedelic session, meaning successful, meaning healthy, safe, and meaningful. And those include the mental set, the physical setting, something safe and comfortable, the sitter, and I recommend a guide, someone who actually knows what they're doing, to assist you if you get into places which are frightening or difficult. The substance, there are many kinds of psychedelics, and how much you take does matter. The session itself, how the 6 to 8 hours or 12 hours things run, what do you do during that time, and what kind of a life group do you come back into? People who support this kind of expanded awareness, or people who feel that you have just done something either evil or dangerous. And so those are the basics, and I want those available out there as widely as possible, because I'm a safety nut, and I'm also a guide nut, which is something that's that important you do as well as possible. And, all of us need help when we're learning things. You don't learn to drive by someone throwing you the car keys and saying good luck.
Okay, to review, you mentioned 6 things in terms of taking psychedelic medicine referred to as LSD. The setting, the sitter, the substance, the session, and the life group afterwards. I'm going to ask you to please, what do you mean when you say the set? What does set mean to?
Set is mental attitude or intention, which is, are you taking this because you really would like to become closer to divinity, however you understand that? Are you taking it because you are interested in working on your own personal issues? Are you taking it just for self-discovery? Are you taking it just for recreation? And as someone just attacked me in New York recently at a conference, they say, is there anything wrong with using things just to have fun? And I had to admit that there's a good argument for that. Other ways of using it are for scientific problem solving, for very hard-nosed, rational problems, and just for kind of discovering what happens inside your own mind when you give it a little nudge in a different direction.
What is an example of using LSD for problem solving? How does one go about doing that?
Well, this is some research that we did just as the government was shutting us down. And we had senior scientists taking what we call the low dose of LSD. And for those of your listeners who know what I'm talking about, that would be 100 micrograms, 100 millionths of a gram. And we basically gave them a safe, supportive setting, gave them a couple of hours of kind of free-ranging inside their mind, and then asked them at the peak of the experience to work on their own chosen and to them very important technical problem. And I mean very technical. Theory of the photon, chip design, architecture, engineering problems, architecture problems, things that they had hitherto had worked on and not been successful. That was our criteria, because we wanted them to care a lot about problem solving. And there's been a lot of stuff on every possible level about Steve Jobs, and my favorite headline is, he took LSD, we got iPhone. Now, what they're really saying is he used it early in his life. He did not necessarily use it during the later products, but what he reported, it was one of the most important experiences of his life. And to me, that meant that he did it well, he did it carefully, and that he was looking at the material world as well as his inner world.
Of course, we don't know whether he continued to use it all the way. We just know that he did use it early on, because there are so many people, as you well know, Jim, myself included at various times in my career, who were willing to talk about using it many years ago. Because
Right.
that really puts distance between me and when I used it, so that if there are those who would come after me for use, I'd say, well, that was 30 years ago, and et cetera, et cetera. But
I think we can say with Steve Jobs that we have zero indication that he used it later in his life.
Mm-hmm.
Given how much that the psychedelic community would like to say something different, basically it's not true.
Well,
he did use it early in his life. It was part of his orientation towards elegance and beauty and making things easy for people, but he did not use it and come up with iTab, with iPad
with the
and so
iPad
forth.
later on. But we also know, for example, that Carl Sagan's widow revealed that Carl Sagan used LSD, but was afraid to tell. Even a man of his great magnitude in the world was afraid to tell the world that he used it in some of his discoveries, which I think speaks volumes about the fear level that has been perpetrated in our country about this.
Well, my favorite is Crick, the Nobel Prize winner, who visualized the double helix upon which, vast amounts of our civilization has turned under this low dose of LSD. And he only told one reporter once, very late in his life, about it, and then he said, but don't print this until I'm dead.
What a remarkable statement about fear. That's what that's about, isn't it, Jim? It has to be. It's a remarkable...
Well, fear and social stigma. And what I've found is when I walk around carrying this book, as authors do, and you'll talk to anyone when you write a book, almost everyone I meet, after I talk to them for a while, suddenly is telling me about their psychedelic experiences. So I am meeting the 23 million.
The book that Dr. Jim Fadiman, who I'm interviewing here, is referring to is his book, his latest book, The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, subtitle, Safe, Therapeutic, and Sacred Journeys. We're offering this book as a premium. If you'll call right now, you can get The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. This is the book, this is the manual on how to safely, and I underline safely, use psychedelic medicine called LSD. It's available for a $100 pledge. I'd appreciate it if you'd please call 895-2233. That's 707-895-2233 and support the station. This may be the only station that's allowing a long list of people to be interviewed on their research around the country in psychedelic medicine. Okay, so we have some idea of what it means, set. It means your mental set. It means what's going on in your mind, what your intention is, and in some cases, as you pointed out, what an assignment is that the scientists were given while they were, after they had ingested the medicine and had been in them for a certain amount of time, a couple of hours. What do you mean when you say the next most important thing of the six most important things that one wants to be aware of when experimenting with psychedelic medicine? Setting. What is setting?
Setting is literally the physical situation in which you find yourself. And Albert Hoffman, who was the discoverer of LSD and at 101 years old was still giving 2-hour lectures to professional groups, was asked, as he said, only 10,000 times, how should you take LSD? And his answer was always take it in nature. My answer is a little different, which is take it in as safe and comfortable a setting as possible, which often is a living room where you are able also to lie down, to listen to music through headphones or earbuds, to put even on an eye mask so that you can investigate the universe from the inside. And then perhaps later in the day, it is good to be out in nature and investigate the universe from the outside. So I'm really talking, setting is really a very physical question.
The physical environment.
Yeah, being and the people who are in that environment, which we'll get to when we talk about sitter, but taking it around people who you feel safe and good with turns out to be very important.
And what about the place of ambient noise? Is that a factor that people should be cautious about? Machine noise, lawnmowers, whatever, the things that are going to intrude on consciousness that are made.
Well, one of the wonderful things we have technologically is headphones, which block out ambient noise. And almost everyone, including, by the way, most of the indigenous people, find music or singing to be a very important part of the experience. And what we found is the reason people prefer music, and music without words, is that it allows them to stop thinking about kind of daily trivia and simply appreciate the enormous expansion of awareness that comes with almost any psychedelic. So the most common experience that anyone ever says is, I never knew music could be so beautiful and so intricate. You know, when you hear a symphony orchestra, you kind of hear a kind of blur of sound with a melody kind of rising and falling. If you're a professional musician, you hear more. But what people report on psychedelics is you can hear each individual section working with and against the others, and even individual players. So you're hearing it at a much higher level of awareness, and headphones seem to be the best way to handle the lawnmower and the ambulance and the jackhammers.
Okay, the setting is the physical environment, nature, or some very safe feeling and quiet place, and the use of headphones to block out ambient sound.
Correct.
What do you mean when you say sitter? That's number 3 of the 6. What is a sitter?
Well, I sometimes lose some of my hipper younger friends when I say you should take it with a guide. But the reason for having a guide, and a guide is someone who knows the terrain, who's been there a number of times, who's not disturbed by a little difficulty. And it's the same reason if you're going to be scuba diving, you start with a guide. If you're going to learn to fly a plane, you use a guide. And the image that makes the most sense to me is a safari guide. You know, a safari guide, say in Africa, doesn't see the animals for you, but he may say, you see that rhinoceros that's running towards us? If I were you, I would stand behind a tree. Or that little patch of smooth, wet sand in front, to your right, that's actually quicksand, and I'd actually walk around it. So a guide or a coach seems to be invaluable if you are taking your own experience seriously and you're interested in using the materials pretty much the way they've been used in a sacred way in every culture we know of that had access to them.
The 4th thing on your list, we talked about the setting, the sitter or the guide. The substance is number 4. What do you mean when you say the substance?
There are an enormous list of psychedelic substances out there. Psychedelic meaning mind-changing or mind-manifesting or mind-expanding, general term. LSD is the one I know the best. There's a family of those called LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline, and peyote the plant, and mushrooms, all of which have the same basic set of experiences available, and the difference is psilocybin takes 6 to 8 hours, and LSD is usually 8 to 12 hours, but no other real differences. There are other families, including the one that is kind of most exciting to people these days, called ayahuasca, which is really 2 plants combined together, which has much, much different, much, much more physical kind of expression, and takes you to a very different, kind of a different part of the radio dial of consciousness. So what you take actually matters, and how much you take matters enormously. If you take too much of anything, and that includes aspirin and peanut butter, you will get ill. And with psychedelics, the too much is of two sorts. One is you really won't know kind of where you are. You can become disorganized and more frightened. And two, and for me this is equally important, you really won't remember the useful parts, the beneficial parts. You'll simply have had an experience that you have no track of. So taking too much, and some people do that to kind of prove how macho they are, and that's just a waste of everyone's time. And if you take a small dose, obvious, you have less of an experience. So knowing, again, the purpose of a guide is so that you don't make a mistake about what's correct for your body and for your intention.
For us, what is a dose if one wants to do inner space work, one wants to explore, one wants to learn about oneself? What is a substantial dose of LSD in micrograms?
That's a 100 to 200 micrograms is what people have used historically when they are working psychotherapeutically. If you're working for spiritual experiences, that's double that. And for people who are alcoholics, and that's probably the best research we have, is for hardcore alcoholics for whom nothing has worked, they tend to take a larger dose because they are used to kind of stifling inside themselves their own altered state.
Mm-hmm.
So really, again, a guide turns out to be invaluable, and giving a kind of dosage over the air to someone who's 80 pounds and someone who's 300 pounds, both of whom are your listeners, is simply not the correct service.
Understood. But what you're saying, across the board in terms of the normal curve is that 300 or 400 micrograms is more of a spiritual dose, and 100 or 200 is more for psychotherapeutic inner work. Is that
right.
correct?
Psychotherapy inner work where you, again, need someone else with you, and if you're going for the higher doses, a guide is an absolute necessity if you wish to discover what it is that classical mystics are talking about.
Is a higher dose 500, 600, 700 or more?
No, that's 300 to 400.
I see. What
By
happens?
the time you're getting above 400,
yes,
my recommendation is don't.
Don't. Okay. By the way, you're listening to Dr. James Fadiman. We're talking about the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, Safe, Therapeutic, and Sacred Journeys. His book is being offered as a premium if you'll call in right now and make a $100 pledge. And I'm asking you, call in right now and make a $100 pledge to KZYX. You can go to kzyx.org, kzyx.org, and check out the pledge drive, check out our program list. There's a lot of good information on there. You want to call 895-2233 right now, 707-895-2233. Listen, I've got a lot of money to make here yet if I'm going to pass what I did last time. So those of you who like my show, help me out too. I've got a reputation to uphold in keeping up with the pledge drive. Back to, I don't hear those phones ringing, folks. Let's do it again. 707-895-2233. Make the phone ring. Make it vibrate right here in the room. You're getting some great information. And by the way, you don't have to do the $100 if you don't have the money for the book. Call up and give $5. $7.50, the price of a movie, right? Okay, let's come back. 6 things that you want to know about experimenting with psychedelic medicine. We talked about the set, the mental set, the setting where you are, the sitter, which is the guide, the substance. We talked about dose. Session is number 5. What is the session, Jim?
Session is literally the hours in which the substance is affecting you. And again, we're talking about a substance in millionths of a gram. It actually leaves the body in about an hour and a half. So everything that goes on is within your own body and within your own body chemistry. But this is a full-day event or a full-night event, and therefore you need to think through that entire time. And remember, we need to reiterate that both my personal taste and my publisher's taste is to remind you these are illegal substances, and that affects all these things. These are illegal substances. People are in prison for far longer than anybody thinks is sane for both using and distributing. And therefore, this is not to suggest that anybody should use these because they are illegal, but a bit like sex, you're probably you're going to be interested in it. You might as well understand it. And if you go ahead and do it, you might as well do it with some good sense to prevent yourself from, illness, disease, and so forth. So with that caveat that this is only for people who have some understanding of what I'm talking about from their prior experience, we are looking at what are the ways that make things safe? What are the ways that make things healthy? What are the ways that lead to afterwards? Because we're not just talking about an experience, like a roller coaster. We're talking about what is called a learning experience. A recent article pointed out that people who took psilocybin once for spiritual purposes at Johns Hopkins University, a year later, were still what they called more open to the creative, more open to relationships, basically a healthier person, as well as psychology can measure it. So that's a bit of what I'm talking about.
I can feel my blood starting to boil when you talk about that study, Jim, because I'm thinking, 50 years of suppression about these medicines, and here's one of the medicines where the people took it one time and a year later, they're having positive effects. How many medicines do we have in our entire pharmacopoeia that you can take one time and a year later you're still feeling positive effects? Basically, what we have in the pharmaceutical industry is you sign up for an annuity, right? You just take something and you're going to be taking it for the rest of your life. You're going to be paying for the rest of your life. And here's a medicine they take it one time and a year later they're feeling the positive, and you can't go out and buy that medicine right now. You can't get it. Your doctor can't prescribe it to you. There's nowhere you can get it legally in the United States.
Let me add to the boil, Richard. Wonderful bit of film footage I saw recently. This was someone who took LSD once 40 years ago and was a serious, heavy-duty alcoholic, losing his job, his marriage was falling apart, life was terrible, and he was totally addicted. Psychedelics, LSD, once in a safe, secure, therapeutic setting, and 40 years later, the filmmaker says, have you had alcohol since then? He said, oh, no, not a drop. And the filmmaker then says something about willpower, and the man laughs, and he says, no interest.
No interest.
So something we're talking about here is about learning, about worldview, about changing the way you see things. And we really need to begin to let go of the medical model. Just as you were saying, the medical model says pill in, body changes, pill out, body back to normal, needs more pill for next change. Psychedelics are really more like discovery. You only have to go to Europe once to find out that the world is much larger than the United States. You don't have to keep going back every week to be reminded.
Yes. Sometimes the way I see it is that the psychedelic medicine finds the atherosclerosis of the spirit and cleans out that athero. It's like a spiritual roto-rooter and gets all the junk out of there and clears it up.
Right. One wants to see something that relaxes the hardening of the attitudes.
Yes. By the way, I want to thank Nancy and Maureen and Ken for making their pledges. Thank you so much. And you too, people who asked to be anonymous, thank you very much. You know who you are. You're calling, and you need to keep calling 895-2233, 707-895-2233. I'll say it one more time, folks. 707-895-2233. Please support this station, which is a courageous station in bringing this information to you. And I mean it literally when I say courageous, because with the stroke of a pen, the government could make this whole station disappear. As many of you know, under the Bush administration, they raised the fine that can be put on these NPR affiliates from something like $50,000 to $500,000 if they want to throw a fine at you to get rid of you. And so the station is courageous. It's bringing this information, kzyx.org. Pick up the phone. 707-895-2233, and make a $100 pledge if you can and get the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. The sixth thing on your list of the 6 essential things to know if for a safe, underlying safe journey that Dr. Jim Fadiman is all about safety. I totally support that. I'm all about safety myself. Is the life group after Tell us about what that means psychologically, the life group that you come into after you've had this experience.
Well, basically, if you've had this kind of transformative experience, remember that 78% of people, most important experience of their life, and you come back to your home and to your family, and they say, isn't that wonderful? We really are delighted that you also now understand what we've known. Or if you come back to your family and friends and they say, that's nonsense. You're not supposed to know about God. There's books for that, and you're always supposed to go to some other authority to ask their opinion. Or even worse is they say this is craziness, and we're not sure that you should be allowed to go to work. So we're really talking about what kind of worldview are you in. And again, fortunately, knowing a lot about your sphere of radio influence, that's not much of a problem in this part of California, because so many people have already had these kind of experiences and are basically aware that the material world simply can't be all there is. No culture but ours has ever made that assumption, and as we all know, we got it wrong, and the world is kind of being loused up by people who don't know that the interconnectedness of all things turns out to be very important. Now, unfortunately, for me and for hanging out with you, I have to go be a teacher at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, which is a place in which psychedelic research is also supported. And I wish you very well, and I only can say to your listeners, if you've ever felt you've benefited from any use of altered state substances, it's time to thank this station for supporting this kind of program.
Jim, thank you so much for being on the program, for taking the time, and for going through these various very important aspects of having a safe trip. I look forward to talking to you again. I hope you'll come on the program again. We're just scratching the surface today.
I'd be delighted, but I got to run.
Okay, regards to Dorothy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. So, 707-895-2233. Dr. Jim Fadiman, who wrote the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, is no longer with us, but his book is with us. What is the subtitle? Safe, Therapeutic, and Sacred Journeys. You want to call right now. Call that number again, 707-895-2233. Make a pledge of $100 and get a copy of Dr. Fadiman's book. Or if you have less than that, you can call us with $7.50. That's okay. Call us with $10. That's okay. I've got some questions here that people called in with, and let's see what's going on here. Well, we're about half there, and we've got 5 minutes to go, folks. $700. My goal is $1,500. I need you to call in so I can make my goal. I don't want to walk out of here with KZYX egg on my face. A listener here wants to know what your guest thinks of Timothy Leary. I don't know quite what to do with that question. I knew Timothy Leary. He was a charming guy. He was very intelligent. He was a lot of fun to hang around with. He was one of the most creative minds to talk to. And I don't know what else to say about one might think about him. I even saw the movie about how his head was cut off and sent into outer space in some kind of cryogenic experiment. I don't know how we're ever going to get to a place where we can find a frozen head floating around in the universe and put it back together on anything. But, that was Tim. What can I tell you? Somebody else here asked a question about something called sarsaparilla plant for the psychedelic experience. Sorry, I don't know anything about it. I can research it, but I don't know anything about a sarsaparilla plant having psychedelic experiences. I can tell you that in 1965, when I was a graduate student, I took 400 morning glory seeds, heavenly blue and pearly gates, because I read in Leary and Alpert's book that they contained LSD, and sure enough, they did. And I had quite an interesting experience. You heard Dr. Fadiman say that 78% of the people in one study said that their psychedelic, their LSD experience was one of, if not, he actually said it was the most important experience of their lives. And I will tell you that in my own experience, of course, I haven't taken it in 78 years, or maybe it was 140 years ago. I can't remember, certainly not in the last 10 or 20 years that I'm willing to admit on the air, that it was definitely one of, I don't want to say it's the most important experience of my life, but it certainly ranks as one of the most important experiences of my entire life in terms of the illumination, the education, and the spiritual connection that I got from it. Of course, I'm not allowed to suggest that any of you experiment with it because it's an illegal substance, but what I am allowed to do is tell you to get a hold of Dr. James Fadiman's book, the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. We seem to be running out of time right now. How are we doing for time here, Rich? Do we have a little tiny bit of time, or should I be wrapping it up?
You should probably wrap it up. I do want to remind people that, there has been studies. I remember hearing about it on Radiolab that one of the other things that gives you almost that same kind of euphoric feeling as many of the drugs you've mentioned today is the feeling of giving and charity. And we would love to hear from you right now at 895-2233, 895-2233, and, feel good. Feel good about giving.
Yeah,
feel good about supporting your community radio station.
Here. Giving is right. And giving love in the form of money, love in the form of taking care of one another, love in the feeling that we're in it together. And by the way, Rich just said something that reminded me of one last thing I want to leave you with. There is a major difference between drugs and psychedelic medicine. One is a medicine for a specific purpose. A drug is something that may change you. You don't know what it is. There's no control over it. There's no safety over it. There's nothing over it. It's just a drug for an experience. A psychedelic medicine is a medicine for a specific purpose, and that has to do with a combination of spiritual enlightenment. It might be for post-traumatic stress. It might be for alcoholism. It's to serve a specific purpose. It's not just fooling around on the street. Important for you folks to know. Thank you so much for listening to today's broadcast of Mind, Body, Health, and Politics.